The correct answer is William Harvey. The
Tight-knit, blue-collar neighborhoods where generations have lived in the same houses, worked the same jobs, and shared the same struggles. Life here moves at a different pace, grounded in community expectations and local traditions. The daily grind for most meant waking up early, working hard, and looking out for your own, but also for those around you. Gossip travels fast, and everyone has an opinion on everyone else's business, whether you asked for it or not. Sarah had grown up right in the middle of it all. From a young age, she had a fire in her, a restless ambition that made her feel too big for the small streets and familiar faces of her neighborhood. She saw the limitations, the predictable paths, and she wanted out. But instead of working her way out honestly, she learned early on that charm, a quick smile, and a little manipulation could open doors faster. She was good at it too. People were often drawn to her energy, her confidence. They saw a bright, spirited girl who just needed a chance. Mark, on the other hand, was everything the neighborhood valued. Earnest, hard-working, and steady. He'd grown up a few blocks from Sarah, his family having lived in the same triple-decker house for 50 years. He worked at the local shipyard, a job his father and grandfather had held before him. He was the kind of man who would help a neighbor fix a leaky roof, or give you the shirt off his back if you needed it. When he met Sarah, he was instantly captivated. Her quick wit and vibrant personality were like nothing he had ever encountered. She sparkled, and he, a quiet man of routine, was drawn to her like a moth to a flame. He saw her ambition as drive, her confidence as strength. He believed in her completely. But even in those early days, in the close-knit world of their neighborhood, subtle hints of Sarah's true nature began to surface. Neighbors would sometimes mention how Sarah always seemed to get her way, how she could twist a story to make herself look good, or how Mark always seemed to be the one picking up the check, even when she was the one suggesting expensive outings. These were small things, easily dismissed by those who liked her, or attributed to her being a strong woman who knew what she wanted. Mark himself, caught up in the whirlwind of their new relationship, often brushed off these observations. He loved her, and love, as they say, is blind. Still, a quiet unease began to settle in him. It wasn't anything he could put his finger on, just a nagging feeling that sometimes Sarah's needs always came first, and as always seemed to get forgotten. He'd make plans, and she'd change them last minute for something that benefited her more. He'd offer help, and she'd take advantage without a second thought. He didn't want to see it. He tried to ignore it, but the pattern was there. The way she handled situations, the way she spoke about people who couldn't give her what she wanted, it all chipped away at his initial idealization of her. He was falling deeper in love, but also starting to see the cracks in her perfect facade, cracks that would eventually widen into chasms. Their relationship, which had started with such a bright spark, slowly began to show its age, like an old house settling uncomfortably into its foundations. The early, exciting days gave way to a routine marked by a subtle, almost invisible, chipping away at Mark's spirit. It wasn't always obvious to outsiders, but for Mark, living it day in and day out, the change was undeniable. Sarah had a way of belittling him that was never outright cruel, but always cut deep. It would happen in small doses, often disguised as a joke or a playful jab. During family dinners, if Mark mentioned an idea for a project at work, Sarah might interject with a dismissive wave of her hand, saying something like, "Oh, Mark always has these grand plans, but you know how he is with follow-through." She'd laugh, a light tinkling sound, and everyone else would usually laugh along, thinking, it was just typical couple banter. But Mark would feel a knot tighten in his stomach. He'd see his mother's slight frown or his father's quick glance of concern, and he'd just nod and try to change the subject. These little moments, repeated over months and years, slowly eroded his confidence. He started second-guessing himself, wondering if his ideas were truly as silly as Sarah made them out to be. Then there were the broken promises. Sarah was a master of painting beautiful pictures of their future, often tied to some financial venture or a move to a nicer apartment. She'd talk about saving up for a down payment on a house or investing in a small business they could run. Mark, always the practical one, would work extra shifts, save every penny, believing in their shared dream. He'd bring home his earnings, proud of the progress they were making, only for Sarah to find a reason why that money needed to go elsewhere. A new car she absolutely needed, a sudden emergency that only she seemed to know about, or an opportunity that would pay off big, but required all their savings right now. The house never materialized. The business remained a fantasy, and Mark was always left to pick up the pieces, often having to work even harder to make up for the sudden financial void. He felt used, but he loved her, and she always had a convincing story, a way to make him feel like he was part of something bigger, even as he was the one doing all the heavy lifting. Her disregard for his feelings became more pronounced over time. If Mark was upset about something, Sarah would often turn it around, making him feel guilty for even bringing it up. "Why are you always so sensitive, Mark?" she'd say, or, "Can't you just let things go? You're ruining the mood." His emotions became a burden to her, an inconvenience. He learned to keep things to himself, to swallow his frustrations, because expressing them only led to more conflict, more blame, and ultimately, more isolation. He found himself walking on eggshells, constantly trying to anticipate her moods, to avoid upsetting her, to keep the peace. It was a pattern of exploitation, clear as day to anyone looking from the outside, but nearly invisible to Mark, who was caught in the middle of it. Sarah always had a need, always had a request, and Mark, with his loyal heart and generous nature, always stepped up. He paid her bills, covered her debts, lent her money that was never repaid, all while she seemed to live a life of relative ease, focused only on her own desires. He was her rock, her safety net, and she took advantage of it, consistently, without remorse. By the time they reached that courtroom, the Mark that sat there, watching Sarah laugh, was not the same man who had fallen for her years ago. He was worn down, emotionally exhausted, a shadow of his former self. The courtroom scene was not a sudden, shocking event, but the inevitable conclusion of years of quiet emotional abuse, manipulation, and neglect. It was the culmination of every belittling comment, every broken promise, every time his feelings were dismissed. It was the moment all those cracks finally gave way. The relentless pressure on Mark only grew as Sarah's demands became more outrageous. Her casual disrespect for him sharpened into something colder, more cutting. Arguments weren't just about money or her latest scheme anymore. They were about everything. Sarah would pick fights over trivial things, often in public, and then expertly flip the script, making Mark out to be the unreasonable one. He'd try to explain his side, his voice calm, but she would interrupt, her words a torrent of accusations, twisting his statements until he sounded like a villain. He'd leave those arguments feeling not just defeated, but confused, wondering if he had truly been wrong, even when his gut screamed otherwise. It was a constant battle, and he was always losing. Their friends, and even his own family, started to notice. His sister Maria would call him, her voice hesitant. "Are you okay, Mark? You seem tired." His best friend David once pulled him aside at a backyard barbecue, asking, "Is everything all right with Sarah? She was pretty harsh with you earlier." Mark would always defend her, or at least try to downplay it. "Oh, you know Sarah. She's just passionate," he'd say, or "We just had a little disagreement." But inside, he felt the weight of their concern. He saw the looks, the quiet glances exchanged when Sarah wasn't looking. He knew they saw it too, even if they didn't say it outright. Sarah, being Sarah, was adept at deflecting these concerns. If someone got too close to asking a real question, she'd turn on the charm, making a joke or shifting the topic, leaving them feeling awkward for ever having brought it up. The neighbors were no different. Their apartment building had thin walls, and the sounds of their arguments sometimes carried. Mark would hear hushed conversations in the hallway, or see neighbors quickly avert their eyes when he walked past. He knew they were talking about them, about Sarah, about him. He felt like an open book, his private misery on display for everyone to see. The silent judgments created an oppressive atmosphere, making their small apartment feel even smaller, more suffocating. He started avoiding common areas, making excuses to stay home, just to escape the pitying glances and the unspoken questions. His internal struggle was reaching a breaking point. Mark felt like a tightly wound spring, ready to snap. He was exhausted, not just physically from his long work hours, but mentally and emotionally. He couldn't think straight, his thoughts a jumble of Sarah's accusations, his own dwindling self-worth, and a deep, gnawing confusion. He loved her, or at least he thought he did. But the person she had become, or perhaps always was slowly destroying him. He felt hollowed out, like an empty shell going through the motions of life. He'd stare at himself in the mirror, barely recognizing the gaunt, tired man looking back. The constant emotional warfare had drained him of all his energy, leaving him with nothing but a dull ache in his chest. The environment around them seemed to amplify his misery. It was the height of summer in Providence, the air thick and heavy, pressing down on everything. The heat made the small apartment feel like an oven, trapping the tension inside. The constant hum of city life, sirens, traffic, distant voices, felt like a backdrop to his own internal chaos, a relentless, monotonous drone that offered no escape. Every little thing felt magnified, every argument more intense, every silent judgment heavier. Mark felt trapped, suffocating under the weight of Sarah's control and his own inability to break free. The breaking point for Mark arrived not with a bang, but with a cold, hard piece of paper. It was a letter from the bank, addressed to both of them, but Sarah had opened it first. He found it crumpled in the trash, smoothed it out, and felt his stomach drop. It was a foreclosure notice. Not for their small apartment, which they rented, but for a property Sarah had apparently bought months ago, using his name on the loan application, without his knowledge. She had forged his signature multiple times on documents he'd never seen. The property was a rundown commercial space she had claimed she was going to flip for a quick profit, a secret venture she'd kept from him, painting it as a future investment for them. Now, it was a mess, and the bank was coming after him for the millions she had borrowed. This wasn't just another argument. This was a direct assault on his future, his credit, his entire life. The realization hit him like a physical blow. All those times he'd dismissed her subtle manipulations, her casual disregard for his feelings, her tendency to spend his money freely, they had all led to this. This wasn't just selfishness. This was outright criminal. The letter detailed the outstanding balance, the missed payments, and the legal actions they were prepared to take. Mark saw his life, his small savings, his carefully built credit score, all dissolving before his eyes because of Sarah's reckless ambition and utter lack of ethics. He confronted her, the crumpled letter shaking in his hand. Sarah initially tried her usual tactics: denial, then anger, then a sudden saccharine sweetness, promising to fix everything, to explain. But this time, it was different. The weight of the impending financial ruin, the blatant forgery, the sheer audacity of her betrayal, had finally shattered his denial. He looked at her, truly looked at her, and saw not the charming, vivacious woman he thought he loved, but a stranger, a con artist who had systematically chipped away at his trust, his self-worth, and now his financial security. He remembered all the little lies, the missing money from their joint account he'd dismissed as a forgetfulness, the strange phone calls she'd taken secret, the vague explanations for her long absences. It all clicked into place. She hadn't just been exploiting his loyalty. She had been actively building a fraudulent empire on his back. The depth of her deception was staggering. He felt foolish, naive, and incredibly stupid for not seeing it sooner. But more than that, he felt a burning anger, a cold fury that pushed out all the sadness and confusion. The decision was agonizing, yet clear. He couldn't protect her anymore. He couldn't be a party to her crimes, not when they directly threatened to destroy his life. He spent a sleepless night, the foreclosure notice spread out on his kitchen table, the numbers mocking him. He thought of his parents, who had worked their entire lives for every penny, and the shame he would bring upon them if he let this stand. He thought of his own dreams, modest as they were, now hanging by a thread. By morning, the decision was made. He would go to the authorities. It wasn't about revenge. It was about survival. It was about self-preservation. It was about reclaiming his name, his future, and what little remained of his dignity. The thought of testifying against Sarah, the woman he had once loved, twisted his gut. But the alternative was far worse. A life ruined by her lies. He knew it would be painful, messy, and public. But for the first time in years, Mark felt a flicker of resolve, a sense of agency he hadn't known he possessed. He would face this head-on, no matter the cost. He would choose himself. Mark's decision to testify sent ripples through their small community. His parents, initially heartbroken by the news of Sarah's betrayal and the financial mess, rallied around him with fierce loyalty. His mother, a woman who rarely raised her voice, called Sarah's parents not to accuse, but to express her profound disappointment. Mark's friends, many of whom had seen the subtle signs of Sarah's manipulation over the years, offered quiet support. A nod of understanding, confirming their unspoken concerns had been valid all along. Some neighbors, who had always been charmed by Sarah's outward charisma, expressed shock, unable to reconcile the image of the bubbly girl next door with the cunning fraudster now being exposed. Others, the more cynical ones who had witnessed her cut corners and exploit situations since childhood, simply nodded, saying, "I knew it would catch up to her eventually." The courtroom was packed on the day of Sarah's sentencing. Judge Caprio, his expression unreadable, listened patiently as the prosecutor laid out the full extent of Sarah's fraudulent activities. The forged documents, the illicit loans, the systematic draining of Mark's accounts. It was all presented with cold, hard evidence. Sarah, who had entered the courtroom with a defiant air, her usual smirk firmly in place, began to crumble as the details emerged. Her carefully constructed facade, built on charm and deception, started to crack under the weight of irrefutable proof. Her laughter was long gone, replaced by a pale, drawn face and downcast eyes. When Mark took the stand, he spoke with a quiet dignity that commanded attention. He recounted the years of emotional manipulation, the subtle put-downs, the broken promises, and finally, the devastating financial ruin she had orchestrated. He didn't speak with anger or bitterness, but with a weary sadness, a man recounting a painful truth. His testimony painted a clear picture of how Sarah had systematically exploited his love and trust, not just for personal gain, but seemingly for the sheer thrill of it. Each word he uttered chipped away at any remaining sympathy the court might have had for Sarah. The judge, after careful deliberation, delivered a sentence that reflected the severity of her crimes and the profound betrayal she had inflicted on Mark and others. Sarah's public spectacle of downfall was complete. The headlines screamed. The local news covered it extensively, and the community, once divided in opinion, now largely condemned her actions. Her once bright future, which she had so desperately tried to secure through fraudulent means, was now a bleak landscape of legal repercussions and shattered reputation. The woman who had laughed at the judge, certain of her impunity, was led away, her head bowed, her defiance finally broken. For Mark, the aftermath was a strange mix of relief and exhaustion. The emotional toll had been immense, but with Sarah out of his life and the legal proceedings concluded, a heavy weight lifted from his shoulders. He started the long process of healing and rebuilding. He sought therapy, something he had resisted for years, to process the trauma of the emotional abuse. He worked extra shifts, diligently saving to restore his financial standing, piece by piece. He reconnected with friends and family he had pushed away during his darkest days, finding strength and comfort in their unwavering support. He learned to trust his instincts again, to recognize the subtle red flags he had once ignored. He understood now that love should not come at the cost of his self-worth or financial ruin. He reflected on the nature of trust, how easily it could be broken, and how incredibly difficult it was to rebuild. There was no joy in Sarah's downfall, only a quiet satisfaction that justice had been served. He had stood up for himself, faced a painful truth, and emerged, bruised but not broken. Mark found peace in knowing he had chosen integrity over complicity, self-preservation over blind loyalty. His future, once overshadowed by Sarah's manipulations, now stretched before him, clear and full of possibility, a testament to his resilience and courage. He was finally free,